Time for another busy fantasy football today here on CBS Sports Network, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings. That's Robert Turbin, and we got a lot to get to. And there's another trade in the NFL on Wednesday. We got DeAndre Hopkins. The Chiefs were definitely in need of a wide receiver, and they go and call Tennessee. They offer a conditional fourth-round pick, and we get DeAndre Hopkins rescued from the Tennessee Titans, joining the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not going to have Juju Smith-Schuster in week number 8 in a game for them that they may not even need a wide receiver against the Raiders, but certainly need one long-term because Rashee Rice out for the regular season. Marquise Brown, we don't know when he's going to return at the end of the regular season or in the playoffs. And DeAndre Hopkins, even at his advanced age, will hopefully help and make a difference for not just the Chiefs, but also for fantasy managers. So, gentlemen, we'll start right there. Robert, I'll come to you first. DeAndre Hopkins has not had a great season with the Titans. That has to do, I think, with the quarterback play. That has to do with him coming off a knee injury in the preseason. It also has to do with him being a little bit older. But is he the answer to the Chiefs' woes? Is he going to make Patrick Mahomes a good fantasy quarterback again? Talk about the football fit of just what DeAndre Hopkins can do for this Chiefs offense.
Well, I don't know if he's the answer to the Kansas City Chiefs' woes. I don't really think they need any answers. I think the Chiefs are the Chiefs, and they're going to be in it at the end anyway. But it certainly gives them another option offensively and another guy that you have to pay attention to for opposing defenses. A lot of what DeAndre Hopkins has gone through this season has to do with, like you mentioned, the quarterback play, the offensive scheme. It just wasn't a right fit for him in Tennessee. So then we assume because he's an older wide receiver, he just doesn't have it anymore. Well, that's not the case, okay? We weren't saying that about Devontae Adams during his tenure with the Las Vegas Raiders, okay? It was just quarterback play and that offensive system. He'll do much better with the Jets. I feel the same way about DeAndre Hopkins with the Chiefs. He'll be much better and a much better fantasy option as well.
Yeah, I think the one place the Chiefs have really struggled offensively has been in the red zone, and that's the one place that Hopkins can still really help them. He still grades out very well when it comes to route running, still grades out very well when it comes to hands. He's not going to do much for you after the catch, and that's a bit of a problem because that Rashee Rice role, or then we saw Juju in that role, like that's a lot of catch short and then run stuff. I'm not sure he's going to do much of the running afterwards, but I do think he'll help them in the red zone. And it's worth remembering that as bad as this year has been, just last year, he was responsible for 34% of the Titans' passing yards and 50% of their passing touchdowns in terms of catching them. That's a pretty huge role. I think there's a chance, there's big upside. He's a must roster if somebody dropped him for sure.
All right, so we had two receivers traded last week in Devontae Adams and Amari Cooper. Adams did not make an impact in his first game. Cooper did, scoring a touchdown for Buffalo. This week, Heath, if Hopkins plays, are you starting him or are you taking a wait-and-see approach?
I'm probably taking a wait-and-see approach, except, listen, you guys were just talking before the show. Oh, I lost Chris Godwin in that league also. A lot of people lost Mike Evans. People lost Brandon Ayuk. I think there's some people that might need to start DeAndre Hopkins just because you're in a bad spot. It's a terrible defense they're facing. We know we've got a motivated Mahomes after all the weird offseason stuff with the Raiders. Wouldn't be surprised if they get him a touchdown. Don't think it'd be like an Amari Cooper type day if it's a good day. He's probably going to play 15 to 20 snaps.
And then just to circle back, Robert, to Mahomes, who's having a miserable fantasy season. And look, he's still an MVP candidate, but he's got 6 passing touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Is this making Mahomes, this move, making Mahomes back as a number 1 fantasy quarterback for you?
No, it doesn't make him a number 1 fantasy quarterback for me. It does help him slightly. I think he'll perform a little bit better than he has, but to call him number 1 by this move, I disagree with that one.
All right, so we'll see if Mahomes can actually be a better fantasy quarterback than another quarterback who's making his first start in the 2024 campaign, and that's Jameis Winston. We know Deshaun Watson is out for the season with the Achilles injury. They are going to start Winston over Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and we know what Jameis is capable of. He's got a 5,000-yard season on his resume. He's got a 30-touchdown season on his resume. He's got a 30-interception season on his resume. Oh, by the way, that all happened in the same year in Tampa Bay. So, Heath, when you look at Jameis now as a quarterback here for the Browns, is he somebody that you look to start in a 1-quarterback league? And take us through the Browns offense. What do you think this does for David Njoku and the rest of the pass catchers?
He is not someone I'm looking to start in a 1-quarterback league, really only adding him in Superflex or 2 QB leagues. There is big weekly upside, and this week against Baltimore, we know they're kind of a pass funnel defense. It's very tough to run against that defense, at least it was before last week, and it's been easier to pass against them, so maybe he has a good game here. I'm not ranking him like that. I am very excited for David Njoku. We saw the first game without Amari Cooper. It was 14 targets for David Njoku. He's basically been an elite fantasy tight end whenever Deshaun Watson's not been the starting quarterback over the last couple of years. And I do think he's a top 4 tight end this week and probably a top 4 tight end rest of season. Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman, and maybe even Elijah Moore, but definitely Jeudy and Tillman. I want a roster. I want to see their target share in their first full game with Winston, and then we'll decide who we're going to start after that.
Robert, who's the best receiver? Forget about Njoku. Receiver for the Browns moving forward. Tillman just had 8 for 81, first game without Amari Cooper. Jeudy got off to a good start early in the season, but just 1 catch for 18 yards on 5 targets in this game where DTR and Winston and obviously Deshaun Watson all played in their loss against the Bengals. So who do you like the best moving forward of those pass catchers?
I'm still going to lean on Jerry Jeudy in this situation. I think Jameis Winston is going to end up targeting him a lot more than the other quarterbacks have, but he's the most dependable receiver, in my opinion, out of the receiving corps in Cleveland right now.
And Njoku just had a huge game. Again, 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. You see, we like him as a top 3 tight end going forward into Week 8 as they take on the Baltimore Ravens. Let's go to Tampa Bay, where we know the bad news that happened Monday against Baltimore. Mike Evans is going to be out until at least Week 12, but more devastating for the Bucs and for fantasy managers. Chris Godwin lost for the season with that ankle injury. So, Robert, where do we go from here? Is it one of these situations where you like one of these other younger receivers to step up? Cade Otton had a big game, 10 targets, 8 catches, 100 yards. Jalen McMillan is a rookie that showed some promise. Trey Palmer a year ago showed some promise. And Sterling Shepard's kind of been a guy that has had some good moments with the Giants, but we know has battled a lot of injuries lately. So what do you think about this receiving core now that they don't have Evans and Godwin?
I think Cade Otton, moves up in the fantasy charts, in my opinion. The other wideouts, though, you're going to probably get some good games from them, but they're not going to have the consistency for me to roster one of these guys on my roster. I know these guys can, play well. Jalen McMillan had a good game the other night, but from a consistency standpoint for the rest of the season, I really wouldn't be leaning on any of these guys. I'd be veering away from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from a wide receiver aspect, but Cade Otton would be a good roster. And then the running backs are going to be heavily dependent on now in Tampa Bay. And if you don't have any of those guys on your roster, I'd be looking that way as well.
Yeah, I think this probably just saved Rachaad White because we saw kind of the writing on the wall with the more efficient running backs there, but he's now going to have a 15% target share every week, so we can have 2 running backs that you might want to start in Tampa Bay. The one thing I want to watch, and I'm definitely adding Jalen McMillan, but I want to watch who gets the Godwin role, who's playing the slot the most, because all 3 of those guys on the screen, Palmer, Shepard, and McMillan, have spent some time in the slot. McMillan actually has the lowest slot rate of the 3. The guy that gets the Godwin role is the one I'm going to be most interested in on a weekly basis. Hopefully that's McMillan.
And McMillan did play a lot of time, spent a lot of time in the slot in Washington, so that's something to keep an eye on there. But Shepard, based on his history with the Giants, that was a role that he had locked down and was a go-to option for Daniel Jones once upon a time. We're going to talk about the Bucs running backs coming up a little bit later in the show with our running back roundtable. I want to go to San Francisco, where Deebo Samuel was released from the hospital. We know he's dealing with pneumonia, had some fluid in his lungs. You got the bad news in San Francisco also that Brandon Ayuk is out for the season with his ACL and MCL tear. So Heath, take me through the pass catchers here. It's a little bit different because Tampa Bay loses their top 2 guys. We hope Deebo is going to come back at some point. Juwan Jennings did not play in the Week 7 loss against Kansas City with a hip injury. Ricky Pearsall made his debut after the unfortunate situation where he was shot prior to the season. And George Kittle is dealing with a foot injury. So how are we viewing San Francisco's receiving core heading into a big game against Dallas in Week 8?
Yeah, I think the 2 guys that are easy is if George Kittle is playing and healthy, he is the best tight end in fantasy football for me. If Deebo Samuel is healthy and playing, he is a top 12 wide receiver. You don't think about starting him no matter what he's looked like so far this season. Juwan Jennings and Pearsall are the 2 guys that are kind of question marks that I think you probably want to try to add both of those guys, and we'll see what their roles are. What we've seen from Jennings when Ayuk's not on the field over his career is in a much smaller sample size, like that elite production we saw in 1 week this year, 46.5 fantasy points. The per route data looks very similar over his career when there's no Brandon Ayuk. I think Jennings is the one. I put in a 15-20% bid in a couple of leagues where I was really desperate for a wide receiver. He could emerge as a top 25 guy if he can get healthy.
Robert, looking at these 2 receiving cores that we just touched on, Tampa Bay, San Francisco, give me your quick ranking of Jennings, McMillan, Shepard, Pearsall, the non-Deebo Samuel guys of Tampa Bay and San Francisco. Who do you like the best?
Well, if I had to rank just those guys, Jennings would certainly be number one. Just like he said, anytime Brandon Ayuk's been out and Jennings has been in, he's produced. And Brock Purdy is very comfortable with Jerron Jennings. I'd really be hesitant on rostering Ricky Pearsall. He'd actually come in last out of all four of the wide receivers that you named. I'd put McMillan at second, Shepard at third, and then Ricky Pearsall last out of those four, Jerron Jennings being number one.
Yeah, it makes sense. Pearsall's got a lot of room to improve, but we know he is a first-round talent, so hopefully playing in San Francisco will help him. But I agree with you. I think McMillan's ceiling is a little bit higher right now, and Shepard just a little bit of safety factor, especially, as Heath said, if he does get that Chris Godwin role. We have a game on Thursday between the Rams and the Vikings, and we have some news for the Rams that they opened the practice window for Puka Nacua. He now has 21 days to return, was actually limited in practice heading into this game, so he may even surprise us and play Thursday night. I would doubt it at this point. But we also have a situation at play where Cooper Kupp is now being rumored to be traded to a bunch of different teams. Apparently, the Chiefs made a call before making the DeAndre Hopkins deal, and Tampa Bay, I'm sure, is certainly interested in trying to acquire Cooper Kupp as well. So, Robert, when you look at the pass catchers here for the Rams, is Cooper Kupp just an auto start when he's playing? I know they may limit his snaps because of the trade potential, or they may not play him at all, or they may just showcase him. There's just a wide variance of things that could happen. Tutu Atwell's done a nice job since Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp have gone down. You got Demarcus Robinson, you got Colby Parkinson, you got Jordan Whittington. A lot of things at play here. They'd love to have Jordan Addison. A lot of things at play here. But what do you think about the Rams pass catchers heading this game against Minnesota?
Well, if Cooper Kupp's healthy, he's an automatic start, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, you get the trade talks going on, but at the end of the day, you're still going to play to win. You got Matthew Stafford as your quarterback. His favorite target over the course of his time in L.A. Has been Cooper Kupp, so there's no doubt he's an automatic start. If you've got Tutu Atwell or any of these other guys, if Cooper Kupp is back, he's probably going to get the lion's share of the targets, and so these other guys may not be as productive this Thursday night. So Cooper Kupp, to me, automatic start. I'd be hesitant with the other guys.
And then you look at Stafford, Heath. He's been a bad fantasy quarterback. Right. But again, losing Puka week 1, losing Kupp week 2, it's understandable. With Kupp back, taking on Minnesota, any interest in starting him?
No interest this week starting him. If we get a situation where maybe the Rams win this game, they decide they're going to keep Cooper Kupp, and then they get Puka Nacua back as well, then we start talking about starting Matthew Stafford. The thing that will be really interesting is if they can start scoring some touchdowns through the air, because what they do is they move down the field through the air sometimes, and then they just ram Kyren Williams into the line until he gets into the end zone.
All right, so we'll see how things go there for Stafford. But yes, if he does get his weapons healthy, will be much easier for him. Robert, when you look at Sam Darnold, he's now had back-to-back games with under 20 fantasy points, taking on a Rams defense that's been up and down against opposing quarterbacks. Are we trusting Darnold? And there is a situation at play here where maybe TJ Hawkinson can return. We'll hopefully get that news later today. If they're going to activate him off of IR, they could always activate him and still make him inactive. But how do you view Sam Darnold in this matchup against the Rams?
I'll tell you what, if Kevin O'Connell still the coach of the Minnesota Vikings, then I trust Sam Darnold. No doubt about it. All right, I know he's been under 20 fantasy points. That's all good. As long as he's still in the double digits, you're still in a good position. I trust Sam Darnold moving forward. This is a good offense. He's got the best wide receiver in the game. Aaron Jones healthy, back last week. I trust Sam Darnold.
All right, so hopefully Darnold can get back on track. Again, back-to-back games with under 20 fantasy points. He had gone into the game in London with three straight games of quality production, 2 of those with over 20 fantasy points. So he's due for some positive regression. Let's take a tweet before we take a break here on Fantasy Football Today. Remember, we're going to answer a lot of your questions. Send them to us on Twitter, X, whatever, call it Twix, using the hashtag AskFFT. Ryan wants to know, he's 3-4. He got offered Josh Jacobs and Marvin Harrison Jr. for Christian McCaffrey. So your game under 500, Heath. Are you taking Jacobs and Harrison and giving up McCaffrey?
Very much so. I tried to trade Christian McCaffrey in one of my leagues for less than this and got turned down. So I would 100% take Jacobs and Marvin Harrison.
Robert, you doing the same thing?
I don't know if I agree with that, James. I don't know if I agree with that. For less than that, that's debatable. That's debatable. All right, but he did try to trade him. He did offer him. But I agree with Heath. I'd absolutely take that trade.
Oh, I guess we had some trade discussion between my two co-hosts here in Robert and Heath. We'll find out about that maybe after the break. I was certainly going to ask some questions during the break, but stay right here to Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Robert. We're now taking a look at the roster trends of the moves that you made on CBSSports.com leagues on Tuesday night. Remember, a lot of leagues run waivers on Wednesday, so this will give you a good indication of the players who are most added, most dropped, and most traded. Certainly some options that you can be looking at for your leagues as well. Let's start with the list of most added players, and you'll see some defenses and some kickers and things of the like, which we will tend to ignore. But I do like the option here of Jalen McMillan being picked up. Now, he was rostered in less than 10% of leagues, so understandable why he's been added in so many leagues. Same with Juwan Jennings. We spent some time talking about it. Let's just revisit it here, and we'll throw in Rashad Bateman. So, Heath, when you look at McMillan stepping into a huge opportunity, we don't know exactly how it will all shake out, and the Bucs can still trade for a wide receiver. You look at Juwan Jennings stepping into a potential big opportunity. We don't know when he's going to play with the hip injury. Or Rashad Bateman, who quietly has been very good for the last month, has had some big games, big touchdowns for the Ravens, and is tied to Lamar Jackson. Of that trio, who do you like the best?
I would view Bateman as the guy that's the consolation prize. Like, should not cost you as much fab. If I don't get Jennings or McMillan, I'm okay with Bateman. He's number 3. Number 1 for me is going to be Juwan Jennings. Now, he might not play this week, but when he's healthy, there's a chance that we just see enormous production from him. It's always been one of the most efficient offenses in football. I think the risk maybe with Tampa Bay that I don't see with San Francisco as much is it's possible that they lose Godwin and Evans, and Baker's just not very good anymore. Like, the pass offense just isn't good. I trust San Francisco and Shanahan to keep that system rolling.
Robert, I want to ask you about the quarterbacks that are picked up here. Russell Wilson and Tua Tagovailoa. They're both coming from different places. Clearly, Russell making his first start last week against the Jets and scoring over 28 fantasy points and looking like he's going to keep the job for the remainder of the season, at least for the foreseeable future. And then Tua is expected to return in Week 8 after dealing with the concussion from Week 2. Take me through both of those scenarios. Can you trust Russell Wilson moving forward as a potential fantasy starter? And are you back in on Tua, knowing that the upside is clearly huge, led the NFL in passing yards last year, but there's a lot of risk if he does get hurt once again?
First of all, I'm all the way in on Tua. You just got to look at the weaponry that's around him and the production that the Miami Dolphins have put out there when he's been the starting quarterback. So there's no doubt that I'm all the way in on Tua. Much more cautious on Russell Wilson right now. Had a good game this last week in his first start. We get all of that. But is that going to be sustainable for the Pittsburgh Steelers? If you think about the Pittsburgh Steelers offensively, historically, they haven't had a sustainable offense, particularly in the passing game. But things can change when you have a Hall of Fame a caliber quarterback like Russell Wilson. If you do roster him, he's more of a bench guy, maybe in a 2-quarterback league or even a 1-quarterback league.
Does have a very good matchup against the Giants, and then they finally get to start to play some games in the AFC North. The only team yet to play in a division opponent in the NFL, but that's coming up in a couple weeks for them. They get Washington after their bye in Week 9, so things looking good for Russell Wilson right now. Hopefully he takes advantage of the Giants defense, and I agree with you 100%, Robert. Tua Tagovailoa can be a league winner, so pick him up. He should be the most added quarterback. Let's take a look at the most dropped players, and these are guys that we've seen. DeAndre Hopkins, for example, was dropped in a lot of leagues in the last couple of weeks. Now you're going to be running to add him, as we saw on the most added list. The injured players, understandably so, Ayuk, Godwin, Shaheed, they're out for the rest of the remainder of the regular season. Heath, we didn't really talk about the rest of the Chiefs receiving core here. So Juju Smith-Schuster dropped. Is that a smart move, or would you hold on to him if you can?
I would like to hold on to him, but the combination of the injury where he's just immediately ruled out for the following week and his injury history, and then the fact that the Chiefs go get DeAndre Hopkins, I understand why people are dropping Juju. It's just you need to understand that there's a possibility that in 2 weeks you're dropping DeAndre Hopkins and picking up Juju because Hopkins couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah, just keep an eye on, hopefully, I always hate when players are ruled out on Monday before practice because that's bad. And Juju's hamstring injury, remember, he popped up on the injury report last week, re-aggravated the injury during the game against San Francisco, and Monday Andy Reid said he's not playing this week. So just something to keep an eye on there. So I understand why people are moving on from Juju Smith-Schuster. Robert, we saw Isaac Guerrendo on the most dropped list, understandably so. We thought maybe he would play last week in place of Jordan Mason. This really isn't about Guerrendo. I just want to get your take on the backfield for the 49ers, because we're not going to talk about that in the running back roundtable. But McCaffrey, when he comes back, what are we expecting? It's been a long layoff. He's got the Achilles injuries that they're monitoring. Is it going to be the same old Christian McCaffrey, or are we going to see a split backfield between him and Mason when he does play, which hopefully will be after their bye, which could be Week 11?
I think you'll see a split carry line share there between McCaffrey and Jordan Mason when he first comes back, just because they want to get McCaffrey, get his, some tread on the tire, things of that nature. But as the season progresses, getting closer to playoffs and things of that nature, once he's got his legs under him again, expect Christian McCaffrey to get the lion's share of the carries and hopefully get back to his old self as far as playing in terms of that. But when he first gets back, I think it'll be split between him and Mason.
And we're going to, again, take a lot of your questions. Use the hashtag AskFFT on Twitter, X. A question about, trading away McCaffrey if you're sub 500 on your fantasy league. If you're above 500, that's the guy to go try and get because he could be a difference maker for you to help win your playoffs. Heath Cummings is a Christian McCaffrey manager that is trying to sell and salvage his fantasy season. So Heath has some perspective on that as well. Let's take a look at the most traded players here. And we've seen McCaffrey and Jordan Mason on this list for a good portion of the season. You got Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, two guys that were traded in real life last week on top of the list. Heath, when it comes to Kareem Hunt, is he a sell-high candidate for you? Because we don't know when Isaiah Pacheco's coming back. Schedule gets a little bit brutal at the end of the season, but he's been so productive because he finds the end zone and really has been the most consistent fantasy option for the Chiefs for the last 3 weeks.
I think these are the types of guys that scare you to both trade away and to trade for because you're right, we don't have a lot of information. If Isaiah Pacheco is not able to come back this year or is not able to become the starting running back for the Chiefs again this year, then I think Kareem Hunt might be a top 15 running back the rest of the way this offense is currently functioning. But it's also possible that Pacheco could be starting in just a couple of weeks. So yeah, I think it depends on whether or not Kareem Hunt is a luxury for your team or not. If you're set at running back and you're good at flex and he's just kind of a luxury, then certainly go try to sell him, turn him into something where you can upgrade a starter at another position. But if you're counting on him and he's helping you win games right now, I'd just keep starting him.
Robert, take me through as a Marvin Harrison Jr. fantasy manager, how you feel about him right now, because he got off to a shaky start in week 1, bounced back the next 2-3 weeks and started producing at the level I think fantasy managers were hoping. But last 2 weeks have been frustrating. The concussion 2 weeks ago, disappointing game against the Chargers last week. Are you looking to, if you did not have him, acquire him? And as a Marvin Harrison Jr. fantasy manager, are you looking to sell him the minute he has a good game?
I traded him. I traded him already, Jamie, a couple weeks ago. And it's all about consistency for me. It's all about consistent production. I've got to know that you're going to be there on Sundays. He's got, all the intangibles and things of that nature. But you mentioned it. It's just been up and down. And for me as a fantasy manager, I'm looking for somebody that I can depend on each week. And I can't depend on him, and I certainly can't depend on Kyler Murray to throw him the football. All right. So I would be looking to sell him, which I already did, as a fantasy manager who has Marvin Harrison Jr. right now.
I do think he's the type of wide receiver. Well, Robert's right. He's not going to be consistent. He's going to have big spike weeks. So if you're of the same mind that you don't want to have this inconsistent player, I probably wouldn't sell him after a couple of down weeks of poor performance. I'm probably just going to leave him in the starting lineup, know that I might get 30, I might get 3, but when I get 30, then I'm looking to sell.
It's just interesting to see. Malik Neighbors got off to such a great start. Brian Thomas has been very consistent. I'm sure there's a lot of fantasy managers in dynasty leagues, some long-term keeper leagues, and certainly redraft leagues that have some buyer remorse on Marvin Harrison Jr., where he was drafted by comparison to those other 2 rookies. Let's just hope that he starts to pick it up and play at a high level. Schedule does not get very favorable for him, including this week against Miami, based on just how they defend wide receivers from a fantasy points allowed to the position. We're going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. coming up in a little bit when we get to start bench cut. All right, let's take one of your questions here. Again, we're going to spend a lot of time at the end of the show answering your questions with our mailbag, but use the hashtag AskFFT if you'd like to get to us. Is Sam Laporta droppable, or does the Jameson Williams suspension keep him relevant? So, Robert, we got Jameson Williams suspended for the next 2 games, expected to be suspended for the next 2 games. I don't think it's official yet. But does Sam Laporta benefit? Because last year, Williams did not do very much, and we saw great production from Laporta. Right now, Laporta's been struggling.
Laporta is definitely not droppable. He'll definitely be in a better position that Williams is suspended. But even if Williams wasn't suspended, I would be looking to trade Laporta before just releasing him to free agency. Try to get something back for him.
We actually, in the league I share with Adam Azer, where he dropped Caleb Williams for Tank Bigsby, we actually have Kyle Pitts as our starting tight end. And I noticed this morning that someone did drop Sam Laporta, and he was available. And I told Adam, we should drop Andy Dalton, like we should have dropped him before, so that we could go get Sam Laporta. Adam wasn't that excited. I think he would rather have Pitts than Laporta. I'd at least, if I see him on the waiver wire, I want to add him and see if maybe, because he's still a very talented player, the Lions just aren't throwing very much right now.
It would be nice to see him benefit these next 2 weeks, and then maybe you sell him after that, because we saw what the first part of the season has been. I thought he turned the corner a little bit when he had the 4 catches in the game against Seattle when Goff only threw 18 passes, and then he has the big touchdown the following week against Dallas. Then he goes back to unfortunately doing nothing last week against the Vikings. So hopefully this is a week for Sam Laporta to deliver, maybe the next 2 weeks without Jameson Williams there. All right, we're going to take a break right now. When we come back on Fantasy Football today, we're going to take a spin around the running backs and talk to Robert about some situations in the league that could impact your fantasy rosters when it comes to a very prominent position. That's next here on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So Heath and I, we talk about running backs. Robert Turbin played the position, so why don't we lean on his expertise and talk about some running backs and some scenarios that could be impacting your fantasy rosters and maybe some moves you can make moving forward. And let's start in Tampa Bay. So we touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and their respective injuries and the roles that the running backs could play moving forward. And here's what these guys did in their game against Baltimore, which, as Heath alluded to, very tough matchup. So you had Rachaad White, maybe his best game ever as a pro. 10 carries, 40 yards. 6 catches, 71 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. You had Bucky Irving, 9 carries, 23 yards, and a touchdown, and a little bit of a role in the passing game, 3 catches, 54 yards on 3 targets. Sean Tucker, 5 carries, 29 yards, and 1 catch for 9 yards on 2 targets. So, Robert, last week going into the game, when we had the 3-headed monster potentially after what Tucker and Irving did against the Saints, you said Tucker was going to be the best guy moving forward, which was, a very solid take, knowing that Tucker had just done what he had accomplished, and we didn't know when Rachaad White would play. So, coming off of this game, knowing the situation now with the pass catchers, how do you view the Bucs backfield moving forward? Is it White is going to be a difference maker as a pass catcher? Is Irving going to be the guy that takes the majority of the carries? Give us the breakdown of the Bucs backfield. Are you still supporting Tucker as the best guy?
I still support Tucker, but not as the best guy. He is going to be complementary, though, to the other 2 backs. This is going to be a 50-50 split, in my opinion, with Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, with Rachaad obviously taking the lion's share of the passing game and Bucky Irving getting the carries and running in between the tackles. Sean Tucker will come in and spell these guys when needed. But I think the Buccaneers really found something in that game against the Baltimore Ravens as it pertains to how they want to utilize these running backs. Because Rachaad White really hadn't been doing much this season, and now he's got his best game, like we alluded to. And so they're going to want more of that, and they're going to put him in position to be successful in the way that he was against the Ravens, catching the football.
I still do think it's really going to be difficult for these guys to be consistent, like top 20 running backs when they're sharing like they are. Nobody had more than a 33% rush share in their most recent game. So last week I didn't want to start any of the 3 because I just didn't know who was going to touch the ball. This week, I'm viewing White and Irving now as high-end flexes, maybe a low-end RB2, but not anyone you're necessarily certain of. And Tucker is still that boom-bust flex. I think he'll probably be dropped in some leagues because people aren't happy with his touches. He's averaging 9.7 yards per touch so far this season. He still has the ability on a weekly basis to get hot on a drive and then get the ball more. I don't want to drop Sean Tucker, but I'm certainly preferring White and Bucky Irving right now.
Fascinating graphic that they showed during the game that the Bucs the last 2 years last in the NFL in rushing. This year they're 8th, at least going into the game against Baltimore. So the game against the Saints certainly helped, but they're doing a much better job with their rushing attack overall. And Rachaad White now is going to be needed in the passing game. So I think we can all say he's got the most upside given the injuries to the wide receivers there in Tampa Bay. Let's talk about Alvin Kamara, who thankfully for his sake got a 2-year contract extension, $24.5 million, and is going to stay in New Orleans for at least the next 2 seasons. But do we have a Alvin Kamara problem on our hands, Robert, at least until Derek Carr returns? Because while he did score a touchdown in Week 6 against Tampa Bay, got you 17.4 PPR points, his last 3 games have been underwhelming, under 40 yards rushing. He has done some work in the passing game, which you love to see, 5 catches each of those 3 games. But he had 6 catches for 14 yards against Denver. Is that just a bad matchup? Or is Alvin Kamara maybe slowing down a little bit? And if he has another good game, would you look to sell him, knowing that this offensive line's been a problem? Carr's already playing through 1 injury when he does return. What's your view on Alvin Kamara rest of season?
If you have Alvin Kamara and you have some depth at running back, if you look at what's going on at the wide receiver spot, injury-wise, he could be a sell guy coming off of a really good game. And the thing for Alvin Kamara is, he just doesn't have the surrounding parts anymore around him right now So that's really derailing his performance. I don't think it has anything to do with his age or anything like that. But the team is dealt with some injuries, and it's really impacting Alvin Kamara's production. So if you need some depth at wide receiver and there's another team that needs depth at running back, there's an opportunity then to sell after a good game for Alvin Kamara.
I think that last part was the key part, because I would say after a good game, I don't really want to sell him right now when things aren't looking good. I'm not going to take a bath and sell him for an RB2 cost or something like that, because I do think when Carr's back, this offense is still going to function through Alvin Kamara. He still has a chance every single week to lead the team in targets and receptions. So he's still a must-start running back, still somebody that I'm holding on to this week unless somebody blows me away with an offer.
And you're not going to sit him against the Chargers. Chargers, are number 3 in terms of fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs. But James Conner just had over 150 total yards against this defense. So Kamara is certainly capable of that. I don't know if we'll get that without Carr on the field. After that, though, Carolina week 9, they're the best matchup you can find on the table. He dominates that matchup. Then maybe you sell him because then he gets Atlanta, Cleveland, and a bye going into week 12. So wait until after week number 9, and that could be the right time to sell Alvin Kamara. All right, Rob, let's talk about the Dolphins backfield here, because Tua is expected to return, and that should make everything better. Whether it makes them perfect, that's hard to expect, but certainly things will be better than what we've seen under Tyler Huntley. Devon Achane's healthy. Raheem Mostert's healthy. Jalen Wright's healthy. Are we going to see 3 guys touching the ball for the Dolphins backfield, or we go back to the 2-headed monster that we had last year? How do you view Miami's backfield with Tua healthy, and looking at even this week's matchup, which seems to be somewhat favorable against the Cardinals, and hopefully they take advantage of it?
I see this backfield very similarly to Tampa Bay, the way that we talked about them. Rashad White, Buggy Irving being like those top 2 guys, Sean Tucker being a complimentary. Same thing here. Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, they're going to run the table and get the lion's share of opportunities in the backfield for the Miami Dolphins. And then Jalen Wright will come in and, play some supplemental and get some opportunities. Could be a huge boom guy, in some games. But I'm putting all my trust right now in Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert, no doubt about it.
I think the real question I have about this is, what's Achane's true efficiency? We saw last year he was the most efficient running back in football, scored once every 10 touches, averaged 7.8 yards per attempt. This year he's at 3.7 yards per carry, and he scored twice on 100 touches. It's probably somewhere in the middle, and that's going to determine whether he's a must-start running back or if he's like Rashad White, kind of someone who's hanging around as a low-end RB2, because I don't think he's going to see 20 touches per game. I agree with Robert in terms of how the work's going to be distributed. Hopefully Tua coming back, freeing up this passing game, helps Achane to be a little bit more efficient, because he hasn't been at all so far this year.
One of the more fascinating stats I saw coming off of week number 7, the Dolphins have scored 70 points as a team this season. They scored 70 points against the Broncos in one game last year. That's how different things are without Tua there since week 2 with the concussion. So thankfully Tua will, at least we hope, will play in week 8 against the Cardinals. Let's talk about one more backfield here, and that is the one in Pittsburgh. And Najee Harris has now had back-to-back amazing games, which we know has been hard for him to find in the last couple of years, really since his rookie campaign where he's been consistent. So, Robert, when you look at Najee, Russell Wilson again made the offense look a little bit better, a little bit more complete. Jalen Warren also looked good, so he's going to be a factor moving forward. So how do you view Najee Harris for the rest of the season, assuming Russell Wilson's the starter? Is Najee Harris now back in the good graces of fantasy managers?
Yeah, I think I think Najee Harris is a RB2, maybe low-end RB2. You definitely have him on your roster. I've got him on mine in the league. And listen, if other guys are hurt or if there's a bye week going on, boom, you feel confident about putting Najee Harris in your starting lineup. I think they're finding something within their run game. He's finding some comfortability within this run game, and Russell Wilson really opens some things up for these backs. I'm not as high on Jalen Warren right now. You're not really seeing the production from him consistently, but no doubt Najee Harris, RB2 in my opinion.
So a couple stats I saw earlier this week. Najee Harris has a 25% tackle avoid rate, by far the best mark of his career. So he's playing better than he ever has. But then the first start for Russell Wilson, Jacob Gibbs tweeted about this earlier this week. There was a huge drop in the number of stacked boxes that Najee Harris ran into this week, and a big increase in the number of light boxes that he ran into, because teams actually have to respect the pass when Russell Wilson's playing quarterback. So I do think Najee's an RB2. He's a great RB2 this week against the Giants. points. I'm interested in Warren as someone I want to roster. He was actually available in about half of leagues because the other thing that changed in Russell Wilson's first time all year that Jaylen Warren played more than 50% of the snaps, actually had 14 touches. If he's getting 14 touches a week, I think he's going to be a good flex.
That's 35 touches for their backfield in a game where Russell Wilson also threw for 289 yards. So big improvement for the offense as a whole. And again, the matchup against the Giants, somewhat favorable. They've done a good job against running backs, so I guess, based on what the expectations are. But yes, I think if you have Najee on your team, certainly comes into that number 2 running back conversation. The only thing that was disappointing, and we talked about this with Russell Wilson starting, no targets, no catches for Najee. That's where Jaylen Warren could make more of an impact. And to both of your points, I don't think we've seen the best of Jaylen Warren because of that knee injury. So he's now 2 games removed from missing 2 games with that knee injury. Hopefully the best of Jaylen Warren is still to come. Before we take a break, let's take one of your questions. Again, use the hashtag AskFFT so we know you're looking for us. I have Nick Chubb in my reserves. Do I drop Ramondre Stevenson or Travis Etienne to bring him into my active squad? So, Robert, what do you think about Nick Chubb and his return? Getting a touchdown against the Bengals last week, losing the quarterback, offensive line played a little bit better. Would you start Chubb over Stevenson or over Etienne, assuming Etienne plays?
Now, Nick Chubb wasn't quite the RB1 that I expected. Okay, I'll admit that. But he did get into the end zone, and he was productive from a fantasy standpoint. If anybody, but this is tough because I like both Stevenson and Etienne. I think I'd start him. I'd probably drop Stevenson. Actually Etienne. I'd drop Etienne in this one to put Nick Chubb in the starting lineup.
I think this is an absolute nightmare decision. I think if Etienne's not healthy enough to play, then that makes it the easiest.
Yeah.
But I think if I was ranking these guys rest of season, it would probably be Chubb and then Stevenson and then Etienne. So I think I'd have to agree.
It's not an easy matchup for Chubb taking on Baltimore. It's not an easy matchup for Stevenson taking on the Jets, and Etienne against a Packers team that's done well against the run. I would probably just hope, like you said, Heath, that we get another week of Etienne off and you just start Stevenson and Chubb. Hopefully Chubb finds the end zone, Stevenson gets involved in the passing game, and your fantasy team works out well. But this trio of running backs isn't exactly elite, so hopefully these guys start to play a little bit better as the season moves on. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back. We're going to play start, bench, cut. We're going to find out who Heath Cummings loves this week at the quarterback position. We'll talk about that next on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. It's now time for start, bench, cut. I give the guys 3 names at the same position. They say who they want in their lineup, who they want on their bench, and who, if they had to make a decision, they would be cutting. So let's start with the quarterback position here. We got 3 rookie quarterbacks. You got Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, and Drake May. Heath, you go first because you have Bo Nix ranked as a top 12 quarterback. He's number 12 for you taking on the Carolina Panthers. So start, bench, cut, Caleb, Bo, Drake.
I'm starting Bo Nix, and here's why. Listen, my early rankings are based heavily on projections, and projections in terms of touchdowns are based on what Vegas says in terms of implied point total. Bo Nix's Denver Broncos are playing the Carolina Panthers. Everybody scores against them. They have a 26.5 point implied total early in the week. That's like the 3rd highest on the entire slate. Bo Nix has scored 8 of the 11 Broncos touchdowns so far this season, has the 3rd most red zone rush attempts amongst all quarterbacks, and has 136 rushing yards over his last 2 games. I'm benching Caleb Williams. I'll cut Drake May.
I second that.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to start Caleb Williams here. He's taking on a Washington defense that's been pretty bad. The nice thing about Bo Nix is, you said it, he scored most of their touchdowns, except last week when the run game got going and everybody runs on the Panthers. I think Javonte Williams has a big game, but I do like that Bo Nix has 64 yards rushing or more in each of his last 2 weeks. But I'm going to cut Bo Nix. I'm going to keep Drake May because I like the rest of season schedule for him in the fantasy playoffs, and I think that's going to matter. So I'm going to keep Drake May on the bench. I'm going to start Caleb Williams. I'm going to bench Bo Nix. But all 3 of these rookie quarterbacks starting to show some signs of life, and we know Jaden Daniels unfortunately not going to play this week. At least that's the way it's trending. But these rookie quarterbacks are all performing for fantasy managers, which is fun to see. Next start, bench, cut we have is at the wide receiver position. Also 3 rookies: Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison Jr., Robert Turbin. Start, bench, cut. Malik, Brian, Marvin.
I'm starting Brian Thomas Jr., I'm benching Malik Neighbors, and I'm cutting Marvin Harrison Jr.
I'm still starting Malik Neighbors, but it is a tough matchup, and I may feel dumb for saying that. I will bench Brian Thomas Jr. Marvin Thomas. I will bench Brian Thomas Jr. and I'm going to cut Marvin Harrison.
I think we're all in agreement who we're cutting. I'm going to start Malik Neighbors as well. It's not like Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't have a bad matchup either. I mean, we just saw what this Packers team did to the Texans passing offense and shutting down Stephon Diggs, shutting down Tank Dell, who had 0 fantasy points. But Thomas is a matchup buster. Hopefully that happens again. But I think Malik Neighbors, when he's right, still has a little bit more of a higher ceiling. I just hope that Daniel Jones on the road shows up like Daniel Jones does on the road, because Daniel Jones at home has been miserable and the Giants were bad last week. Next one we're going to is 3 wide receivers that have had things change for them. So 2 guys that were traded, Davante Adams and Amari Cooper, and George Pickens getting a new quarterback. So Heath, who are you starting, who are you benching, who are you cutting? Davante Adams now on the Jets, Amari Cooper now on the Bills, and George Pickens now with Russell Wilson as his quarterback.
The easiest one for me is the cut, and I'm cutting Amari Cooper. Pickens and Adams are very, very close for me. I'm going to start George Pickens. I'm going to bench Davante Adams. I'm going to cut Amari Cooper.
Wow. Actually, cutting Amari Cooper is not as easy as you made it sound. I'm actually going to start Davante Adams in this situation. Amari Cooper and George Pickens are much closer to me in this situation. I'm going to lean towards Amari Cooper on my bench, and I'm going to cut George Pickens.
I guess we're all over the place here. I'm going to start George Pickens. I agree with Heath on that one. I think just what we saw with Russell Wilson taking on the Giants, they've been bad against opposing wide receivers. I think Pickens' ceiling is hopefully going to show up here. I'm going to bench Amari Cooper because I'm going to just be the ageist again, and I'm going to cut Davante Adams, who shares the field with a very, very, very solid wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. He might not be going away. So Davante Adams still has a lot to prove, even though he's got the longest history with the quarterback that he plays with. All right, last one we'll do here is at some 3 tight ends. We got Brock Bowers, David Njoku, and Trey McBride. We know Bowers has been awesome and benefits without Adams there. Njoku now could be the number 1 tight end, certainly has top 3 upside. And Trey McBride still doing a very solid job coming off a bad game against Chargers. But Robert, who we starting, who we benching, who we cutting of Brock Bowers, David Njoku, and Trey McBride?
Right in order. I'm starting Brock Bowers, I'm benching David Njoku, and I'm cutting Trey McBride.
I will start Bowers. I would start Njoku over McBride this week, but I always think of that bench as rest of season, so I'll bench McBride. I'll cut Njoku.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go that route also, just because who knows what the Browns do if they go back to DTR. That would be bad, I think, for Njoku, but Brock Bowers is the easy start. He's just been fantastic. What a rookie season he's having. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back. It's all your tweets. Send them to us on Twitter, X, using the hashtag AskFFT, and that's what's next here on Fantasy Football Today. It's all about you to close the show. Thanks for your questions. Use the hashtag AskFFT. That way we know you're looking for us and we can help you. I've got James Conner, Devon Achane, Javonte Williams, Jordan Mason, and Joe Mixon. Mixon is the obvious start. Who should be my RB2, Robert, and my flex? So who are you starting along with Joe Mixon here in a PPR league?
RB2, James Conner, great matchup there. And then Javonte Williams should be your flex. A great matchup for him this week.
Love him against the Carolina Panthers. Next question. I was offered Chris Olave and Deontay Johnson for Nick Chubb in a PPR league. Heath, what do you think?
I think I'd rather have Chris Olave than Nick Chubb rest of season, so you shouldn't give up Deontay Johnson too. I would not do it.
Yep, I would keep the receivers and hopefully do a little bit better. If
he was offered Chris Olave. I would take it.
Yeah,
take the deal.
I'm sorry, 100% take it. Next question. Pick one in a PPR league, Robert. Devontae Smith or Amari Cooper?
Amari Cooper. Going to Amari Cooper right here.
I think so. It makes it a lot easier if Dallas Goedert does return. Next question. Should I start Dak Prescott or Kirk Cousins?
You know what? I've got a little bit of optimism over Dak Prescott coming off the bye. Kirk Cousins has only had 2 good games all season. I'll start Dak.
Dak averages 28 fantasy points per game in his career coming off of a bye. Last question for us here. All right, Robert. Standard league flex position, Tank Bigsby or Tony Pollard?
Bigsby.
The non-PPR helps him out, but I'm still going Pollard.
All right, last one, Robert. We got one more. Stash Drake May or Anthony Richardson rest of season?
I would stash Drake May. No doubt.
It's just a shame what's happened to Anthony Richardson. He does get the Texans. That is the game he had his best matchup against. 31 fantasy points in week 1 against the Texans. 34 fantasy points combined in his 3 other starts. That'll have to change. Hopefully he does well in the rematch. All right, that'll do it for us here on Fantasy Football Today. Make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are found. We will help you dominate your leagues like we always do. For Robert, for Heath, I'm Jamie. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it.